In June of 1947, two American radio operators stationed in Malaya intercepted a fractured Morse code transmission from the Strait of Malacca. The signal was weak, cutting in and out through heavy static. But the words that came through were unmistakable. All officers, including Captain, dead, lying in chart room and on bridge, possibly whole crew dead. A British listening post confirmed the signal moments later. Then came two final words from the unknown sender: "I die." After that, nothing. No correction, no updated position, no follow-up transmission. Just dead air where a man's voice had been seconds before. Multiple stations triangulated the source to a position deep in the strait. The nearest vessel, the American merchant ship Silver Star, was already transiting the same waterway. Her captain altered course toward the coordinates immediately. He expected to find a ship in distress, a fire maybe, or a mechanical breakdown. What his crew would discover when they reached the Ourang Medan would become one of the most disturbing accounts in maritime history. The Silver Star reached the coordinates and found the Ourang Medan drifting in calm water. No fire, no list, no visible damage of any kind. The ship sat motionless on the surface, as if her crew had simply walked away. The Silver Star's radio operator tried to hail her. Static. He tried again on every available frequency. Nothing came back. The captain assembled a boarding party. A small boat was lowered, and the men rowed across the gap between the two vessels. From the outside, the Ourang Medan looked perfectly intact. Hull sound, superstructure undamaged, cargo hatches still sealed. But the ship was completely silent. No engine noise, no movement on deck, no sign that anyone aboard was alive. The boarding party climbed the rail and stepped onto the foredeck. What they found stopped them where they stood. The entire crew of the Ourang Medan was dead, every single one of them. They lay scattered across the deck, the bridge, the chart room, and the passageways, flat on their backs, eyes wide open, mouths frozen in expressions of absolute terror. Their arms were raised, reaching towards something above them that was no longer there. No blood, no wounds, no burns, no marks of any kind. Nothing explained what had killed them all in what appeared to be a single moment of overwhelming fear. Every body was locked in the same posture, arms up, eyes wide, faces twisted in raw, wordless horror. The ship's dog was dead too. It lay near the bow, teeth bared in a rigid snarl, body stiff, eyes locked open. Even the animal had died in what looked like a state of pure terror. Whatever had swept through this ship had killed everything aboard, crew and animal alike. The boarding party moved through the vessel compartment by compartment. The boiler room was still warm. The engines could have been restarted. The Ourang Medan was mechanically sound, structurally intact, fully operational. Whatever had killed everyone aboard had left the ship itself completely untouched. Only the crew was gone. The Silver Star's crew attached a tow line to bring the Ourang Medan back to port. They had barely begun moving when smoke started rising from the number 2 cargo hold. It began thin and white. Within minutes, it thickened into dense black clouds pouring from the hatches. The captain ordered the tow line cut immediately. The order came too late. A violent explosion ripped through the Ourang Medan's hull, splitting the ship apart. She sank in seconds.
Every body, every piece of physical evidence, every possible answer, all of it went to the bottom of the Strait of Malacca.
The Silver Star's crew watched from a safe distance as debris scattered across the surface. Then the current took even that. Within minutes, the strait was calm again. The ocean had closed over the Ourang Medan as though the ship had never been there at all. The strongest explanation points to undeclared cargo, specifically chemical weapons left behind after Japan's surrender in 1945. Nerve agents, mustard gas, and nitroglycerin compounds had been stockpiled across Southeast Asia during the war. After the surrender, covert shipments moved through the Malacca Strait on unmarked vessels. Declassified CIA documents confirm this exact traffic in this exact region during this exact period.
If the Ourang Medan had been carrying unstable agents, a leak in the cargo hold could have released toxic fumes that killed the crew through rapid nervous system failure. The explosion would have been a secondary reaction, volatile compounds finally reaching ignition point as the Silver Star attempted the tow.
Carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty boiler has also been proposed, but carbon monoxide causes drowsiness and quiet unconsciousness, a slow fade into sleep. It does not leave men frozen with their arms raised in terror. It does not leave a dog caught mid-snarl. But the most unsettling part of the Ourang Medan case is not how the crew died. It is whether the ship ever existed at all. She does not appear in Lloyd's of London shipping register. No maritime database from any nation lists her. No shipyard has construction records. No insurance company ever issued a policy for her. The entire paper trail consists of a single article in the Dutch-Indonesian newspaper De Locomotief, published in February 1948. Silvio Sherley referenced the case in a 1952 United States Coast Guard publication, but even he could not verify the ship's registry, nationality, or crew. Did this ship actually exist? If it did, why was every record of it erased? And if it never existed, who sent that distress signal? And who were the dead men the Silver Star found? A ship full of dead men with no wounds. A vessel with no registration. An explosion that buried every answer at the bottom of the strait. The Ourang Medan may have never existed at all, but the next ship was very real, registered, insured, crewed, and documented. She sailed out of Charleston in November 1925, and for 95 years, no one knew where she went. The SS Cotopaxi was built in 1918, a sturdy, unremarkable cargo steamer designed for the Atlantic trade routes. She had logged 7 years of reliable service, hauling coal and dry goods between American ports and the Caribbean without a serious incident. Her hull was sound, her boilers ran clean. She was the kind of ship that did her job and drew no attention. On November 29, 1925, the Cotopaxi departed Charleston, South Carolina, bound for Havana, Cuba, with roughly 2,300 tons of coal in her hold. 32 crew members were aboard. The route was a well-traveled commercial passage, south along the coast, through the Florida Straits, and across to Cuba. Ships made this run regularly. It was supposed to be routine. But the Cotopaxi's course would take her through a stretch of ocean that had already earned a grim reputation among sailors. The waters between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. A region the world would eventually call the Bermuda Triangle. The Cotopaxi would become one of its most enduring legends. She was never going to reach Havana.
2 days into the voyage, on December 1st, the Cotopaxi's wireless operator sent a brief, urgent distress signal. The ship was taking on water. She was listing dangerously. The operator transmitted a position south of Jacksonville, open Atlantic, deep water. Then the signal stopped. No follow-up. No updated coordinates. No further contact of any kind. Search vessels found nothing. No wreckage, no lifeboats, no oil slick, no bodies. The Cotopaxi and her 32 crew members had vanished, as if the ocean had swallowed them whole. Lloyd's of London added her name to the missing vessel's register. One line, no explanation. The families of 32 men received no answers.
What made the disappearance so hard to accept was the Cotopaxi's record. 7 years of Atlantic service without a serious incident. Her crew was experienced. Her captain knew the route. Whatever struck between that final distress call and the silence that followed must have been catastrophic. And fast. Too fast for lifeboats. Too fast for a second message. Too fast for anything but the end.
For nearly a century, the SS Cotopaxi existed only as a name in Lloyd's missing vessels ledger, one entry among thousands of ships that had sailed out and never returned. No wreckage surfaced, no debris washed ashore. The ship simply faded from the record, while the families grew old, waiting for answers that never came. Eventually, the Bermuda Triangle mythology absorbed her. The Cotopaxi became another name in the growing catalog of vessels supposedly swallowed by supernatural forces in the Devil's Triangle. By 1977, she had even appeared in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, fiction claiming a mystery that history could not explain.
But the Cotopaxi had not vanished into another dimension. She had not been seized by any force beyond the ordinary. She had been resting on the ocean floor the entire time, roughly 70 miles off St. Augustine, Florida, waiting for someone to come looking.
For 95 years, the 32 families waited. For 95 years, the ocean gave back nothing. Not a plank, not a life jacket, not a single clue. The Cotopaxi was simply gone. In 2020, marine biologist and shipwreck researcher Michael Barnett turned his attention to a wreck that local divers had known about for years. They called it the Bear Wreck, an encrusted hull sitting on the seafloor off Florida's northeast coast. Divers had been visiting it for decades, but no one had ever formally identified it. Barnett compared the wreck's dimensions, depth, and position against historical records from the 1920s. He cross-referenced Lloyd's documents, insurance filings, and NOAA ocean data. The measurements matched. The location matched. The timeline matched. After 95 years, the pieces finally fit together. The Bear Wreck was the SS Cotopaxi.
The ship that had fueled a century of Bermuda Triangle mythology had been sitting on a known, accessible stretch of seafloor the entire time. No supernatural void, no interdimensional rift. Just a vessel that sank in a storm and settled on the bottom, while the world built legends around her disappearance.
The wreck confirmed where the Cotopaxi went down, roughly where her final distress signal had indicated. But it did not answer the central question. Her 7 years of clean Atlantic service showed no structural weakness. Her coal cargo should not have shifted catastrophically. Whatever sank her happened too fast for the crew to respond, and the wreck itself, after 95 years on the seafloor, offered no clear explanation.
Corrosion and marine growth had buried most of the physical evidence. The hull was too degraded to reveal what had breached it. The wreck gave up its name, but kept its cause. If the distress call was accurate, if the Cotopaxi was already listing and flooding, the crew would have had only minutes. No time for lifeboats. No time for anything. The ocean had returned the ship, but it kept everything else. The 32 men who sailed the Cotopaxi out of Charleston in November 1925 were never accounted for. Their names stay in Lloyd's register, matched now to a location on the seafloor, but still without an ending. The Cotopaxi had been found after 95 years, but finding the ship explained nothing about the 32 men who sailed her. The ocean returned the hull and kept the crew. But in the next story, the ocean would not be the villain. The real danger would come from the men in command, and the victims would not vanish. They would be deliberately abandoned. On June 17, 1816, a convoy of 4 French naval vessels departed Rochefort, bound for the port of St. Louis in Senegal. France had just reclaimed the colony from Britain under the Treaty of Paris, and the convoy carried soldiers, settlers, and administrators to re-establish French control. The lead ship was the frigate Medusa, the fastest in the group. She would reach Africa first. The Medusa carried over 400 people, far more than her lifeboats could hold. But no one was concerned about lifeboats. The crossing to West Africa was well charted. The weather was favorable. The convoy had clear orders. Nothing about this voyage suggested catastrophe. Nothing except the man commanding the ship. Captain Hugues Duroy de Chamarays had not commanded a vessel in over 20 years. His appointment was purely political, a reward for royalist loyalty during the Bourbon Restoration. Not a recognition of seamanship, not a measure of competence. Chamarays had spent 2 decades ashore. He had no recent experience with navigation, crew management, or handling a warship under pressure. His officers recognized the problem immediately. The captain could barely read a chart. They warned him about the known hazards along the West African coast, specifically about the Arguin Bank, a vast, shallow sandbar off Mauritania that every competent navigator avoided.
Chamarays dismissed every warning. He abandoned the established safe route, overruled his officers' navigation corrections, and pushed the Medusa ahead of the convoy at full speed. The 3 other ships maintained their course and passed the hazard without difficulty. Chamarays sailed directly into it. On July 2, 1816, the Medusa struck the Arguin Bank at speed and ran hard aground. The sea was calm. The sky was clear. There was no storm, no mechanical failure, no sudden crisis. Just a captain who had steered his frigate onto a well-charted sandbar that every other ship in his own convoy had avoided. The Medusa sat wedged on the sand, her hull grinding against the bottom with each passing wave. 2 days of refloating attempts failed completely. Now the crew faced a grim arithmetic. The Medusa carried over 400 people, but her 6 lifeboats held roughly 250. The officers and their families secured their places first. The remaining 147, soldiers, settlers, and junior crew, were told a raft would be built from the ship's masts and spare timber. They had no other option. The raft measured roughly 20 meters long and 7 meters wide.
147 people were crammed onto it, standing waist-deep in water before it even left the side of the ship. They had 6 barrels of wine, 2 small casks of fresh water, and almost no food. The plan was for the lifeboats to tow the raft toward the African coast, roughly 60 miles away. The tow began. The raft was impossibly heavy. It barely moved. After a few miles, the tow lines went slack. Then they disappeared entirely. The officers in the lifeboats had made their decision. They cut the ropes, chose their own survival, and rowed toward the coastline without looking back. 147 people watched the boats shrink and vanish on the horizon. They were alone. No sails, no oars, no navigational instruments, no way to steer, no way to signal, no way to reach land. The raft drifted with the current, away from Africa, into open water. The officers in the lifeboats reached the African coast within days. All of them survived. They had left 147 people to die on the open ocean, and they knew exactly what they were doing. The first night brought chaos. Men clawed toward the center of the raft where the planking was thickest and most stable. Those on the edges were washed overboard by waves. By dawn, 20 people were dead. By the second day, thirst had driven some to drink seawater, which sent them into violent delirium. Fighting erupted. The strong began hurling the weak into the ocean. On the 4th day, with no food remaining and no sign of rescue, the survivors crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They ate the dead. Strips of flesh were dried in the sun and consumed by men who had been colleagues days earlier. By the 8th day, the strongest survivors made a cold calculation. Too many mouths, too little hope. They threw the weakest and the wounded overboard alive. 13 days after the tow lines were cut, the brig Argus spotted the raft. Of the 147 people placed on it, 15 were still alive. They were skeletal, sunburned beyond recognition, and barely conscious. Their raft was a slaughterhouse, stained, slick, and strewn with remains. 5 of those 15 died within days of rescue. 10 survivors, out of 147. 13 days on a raft that should never have been built, abandoned by officers who could have towed them to safety, under a captain who should never have held the wheel. Captain Chamaraise faced court-martial for his incompetence and for the decision to abandon the raft. His sentence? 3 years in prison. 3 years for 137 deaths caused by a man who should never have commanded a ship. The French government tried to suppress the scandal. Officials buried the details. The Navy issued no public statement. But 2 survivors refused to let it disappear. Alexandre Corillard, a geographer, and Jean-Baptiste Savigny, the ship's surgeon, published their first-hand account in 1817. They named the dead. They described the cannibalism in detail. They exposed the officers who had cut the tow lines. The book became a sensation across Europe and blew the government's cover-up apart. The captain had failed them. The officers had abandoned them. The government had tried to erase them. But Corillard and Savigny made certain the 137 dead would not be forgotten. In 1819, painter Theodore Géricault exhibited a massive canvas at the Paris Salon, 16 feet tall and 23 feet wide. He had spent 18 months preparing it. interviewing survivors, visiting morgues, and studying decomposing corpses to capture the exact texture and color of dead flesh. The painting showed the raft at the moment of rescue, the Argus visible on the horizon, the dead tangled with the living in the foreground.
He called it the Raft of the Medusa. It hangs in the Louvre today, a permanent accusation, 5 meters of canvas that refuses to let France forget what its officers did in the summer of 1816. The captain served 3 years in prison. The painting has been serving its sentence for over 200.
A captain's incompetence had killed 137 people on a raft they should never have been placed on. The Medusa was a disaster made entirely by human hands. But the final story would be different. This time, the ship was modern. The captain was experienced. The crew did everything right. And the water took them anyway, in 10 minutes, without warning, without a single distress call.
The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was launched on June 7, 1958, at the Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge, Michigan. At 729 feet, she was the largest ship on the Great Lakes, a massive ore carrier built to haul iron and taconite across Superior, Michigan, Huron, and Erie. The shipping industry called her the pride of the American side. For 17 years, the Fitzgerald broke cargo records season after season, carrying more ore per trip than any vessel on the lakes. Her hold stretched nearly the full length of the ship, a vast steel cavern that swallowed over 26,000 tons of iron pellets in a single loading. By November 1975, the Fitzgerald had completed hundreds of crossings on Lake Superior. She had weathered every storm the lake had thrown at her. Her next crossing would be her last. Captain Ernest McSorley was 63 years old in the fall of 1975. He had spent 44 years on the Great Lakes, nearly his entire adult life. He knew Superior's behavior intimately, the way the lake could turn from glass to chaos in hours, the dangerous shoals along the Canadian shore, the November storms that came down from the northwest with almost no warning. He had survived all of them.
McSorley was approaching retirement. He had earned it. Decades of crossings, hundreds of storms, not a single ship lost under his command. He knew the Fitzgerald better than anyone, understood her limits in heavy weather, read her vibrations through the deck plates like a language. This November run was supposed to be one of his last. It would be. On November 9, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald loaded 26,116 long tons of taconite pellets at Superior, Wisconsin. 29 crew members were aboard. The National Weather Service had posted gale warnings for Lake Superior, but McSorley had sailed through worse. He chose a northern route along the Canadian shore, where the land would provide some shelter from the expected northwest winds. The Arthur M. Anderson, another ore carrier, commanded by Captain Jesse Cooper, departed on a similar heading shortly after. The two ships would travel in loose convoy across the lake, maintaining radio contact throughout the crossing. Cooper and McSorley spoke regularly as conditions worsened. Cooper would be the last person to hear McSorley's voice. He would spend the rest of his life replaying that final conversation. By the afternoon of November 10, the storm had intensified far beyond the original forecast. Sustained winds exceeded 50 miles per hour, gusting to nearly 90. Waves on Lake Superior climbed past 35 feet.
massive walls of cold fresh water that buried entire ship decks and held them under for seconds at a time. The Fitzgerald was taking serious damage.
McSorley radioed Cooper with a damage report. A fence rail was down. 2 vent covers had been ripped away, opening the cargo hold to the waves. The ship was developing a noticeable list. Then came the worst news. Both of the Fitzgerald's radar units had failed. The largest ship on the Great Lakes was now completely blind in a storm that was still building.
Cooper tracked the Fitzgerald on his own radar, the 2 vessels roughly 10 miles apart as they fought south toward Whitefish Bay and the shelter of the lower lakes. McSorley adjusted his course based on Cooper's bearings. The Fitzgerald was damaged, listing, taking water, and without instruments. But she was still moving, still under power, still responding to the helm.
McSorley had been through worse, or so he believed. But Lake Superior was building towards something that November night that none of them had ever seen. Conditions that would generate some of the highest waves ever recorded on the Great Lakes. The Fitzgerald was heading straight into the center of it. At 7:10 p.m. on November 10, Cooper radioed the Fitzgerald to check her status. McSorley's reply was calm, no panic, just the measured, steady tone of a captain managing a bad situation, the kind of voice Cooper had heard from experienced masters 100 times before. McSorley's words would become the most quoted sentence in Great Lakes maritime history. "We are holding our own."
10 minutes later, the Edmund Fitzgerald's radar blip vanished from the Anderson screen. Cooper called the Fitzgerald. No response. He called again. Silence. A third time. Nothing. No mayday, no SOS, no distress flare, no attempt to launch lifeboats. A 729-foot ship carrying 29 men had simply ceased to exist. The wreck was located 17 days later by a Navy aircraft using magnetic anomaly detection. The Edmund Fitzgerald lay in 530 feet of water, broken into 2 sections. The bow sat upright on the lake floor. The stern rested inverted, 370 feet away. Whatever had torn the ship apart had done so with devastating speed. The crew had no time to react, no time to radio, no time to do anything at all. 3 separate investigations reached 3 different conclusions. The NTSB blamed massive flooding through failed hatch covers. The Coast Guard pointed to structural fracture and progressive flooding. The Lake Carriers Association argued the Fitzgerald had scraped 6 Fathom Shoal earlier that day and suffered hidden bottom damage that only revealed itself under storm stress. None could prove their theory conclusively. The investigations contradicted each other and left the central question unanswered. What happened in those 10 minutes between "we are holding our own" and the moment the Fitzgerald vanished from radar? In 1976, Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot released a 6.5-minute ballad about the disaster. The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald restored the names of all 29 crew members to public consciousness and became one of the most recognized maritime songs ever recorded. Lightfoot had read about the sinking in Newsweek magazine and could not let the story go. The ship's original bell was recovered from the wreck and placed in the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point, Michigan. A replica bell, engraved with all 29 names, was lowered to the wreck site to take its place. Every November 10th, the museum rings the original bell 29 times, once for each man who never came home. Lake Superior kept all 29 of them.
The Edmund Fitzgerald remains on the lake floor as a protected gravesite, sealed under federal law. Her crew is still aboard.
4 ships, 4 disasters, spread across 2 centuries and 4 different bodies of water. The Strait of Malacca, the Bermuda Triangle, the coast of West Africa, and the middle of Lake Superior. The Ourang Medan carried dead men with terror frozen on their faces and no wounds on their bodies, and may never have existed at all.
The Cotopaxi carried 32 sailors into the Atlantic and hid them for 95 years. When the ship was finally found on the ocean floor off St. Augustine, the mythology dissolved, but the crew never surfaced. 32 names in Lloyd's register, still waiting for an explanation that the wreck itself could not provide. The Medusa did not sink. She ran aground because a man who could not read a chart had been handed command of a warship. 147 people were placed on a raft and deliberately cut loose by the officers who were supposed to protect them. 13 days later, 10 were still breathing. The captain received 3 years. The painting in the Louvre has outlasted every argument the French government ever made. And the Edmund Fitzgerald, 729 feet of American steel crewed by 29 experienced sailors, went from "we are holding our own" to gone in 10 minutes. No warning, no goodbye. Her bell rings every November at Whitefish Point. The lake has never given back a single one of her crew. 4 ships, 4 kinds of silence, and not one of them has been fully answered.